Okay, so this is going to be my most in-depth, literally my ultimate Whirlwind Barbarian guide, leveling from 1 to 100 all the way, and including absolutely everything. How I'd recommend the level, you know, the builds, the skills, the Paragon, everything is going to be in this. So let's just start with the, obligatory, if you've not done the campaign, if you've not done the renown, do that first, then come back to this video. For everybody else, the first thing I would recommend is if you're starting a Barbarian from fresh, from levels 1 to 25, you're going to want to just spam Dead Man's Dungeon or like some other dungeon that you prefer. And just, concentrate on picking up blue gear that's got a green arrow on it and don't waste too much time worrying too much about it. Once you get past like level 25, that's when you're going to start, getting yellow gears, when you start imprinting your gear and hopefully moving to world tier 2. And this is my recommendation for the aspects. Now, absolutely do not try and get all of these. This is kind of a, if you can. I will include a version of this build which is more budget orientated. If you've completed the campaign, you should have all of these codexes. They're all from the book. So these are ones that you can get by completing dungeons. If you've not got them, then you can actually hover over them and see what dungeon they come from. You can do this in game 2 and get it marked really nice and easy. I'll just show you here. So if you press Y to open the codex, go here, look for one you don't have, and then it's locked. So let's left click on the pin. And now I can see exactly where it is. It's going off somewhere. I can't see there's the pin up there. So there you go. That's how you can find where they are if you don't know where they are already. But anyways, this is an ultimate best case scenario. The ones that I would consider necessities are in the budget build. So check that one out if you want to see them. But they're basically Disobedience, Numbing Wrath, Dire Whirlwind, and Edgemasters, Echoing Fury, and Umbral. Those are ones I definitely want you to try and get because it'll make your leveling experience a lot smoother. If you're lucky enough to get any gems, then this is what I'd recommend you having. Don't bother putting sockets on the gear. You replace it far too quickly. I'll get into this in just a minute. I did go ahead and stick a bunch of the sort of stat priorities through here. If you can get 1 or 2 of these on a piece of gear, it's fantastic. Don't be too picky. You're very unlikely to hit all of this. In any place I've put damage reduction or I've put, damage, I just mean any type. Not like just flat damage reduction, and flat damage is great, but any type of damage reduction, any type of damage is fun, absolutely fantastic. If you happen to hit a piece of gear that has all of these on it, then you might be looking at something you're going to be keeping for a very, very long time. And it may be something you might want to consider upgrading. Usually I would advise against it, but you could take these pieces like this helm to the blacksmith and upgrade it. Now, at this level, you won't get 4, you'll get 3. But if you get 3 of these, yeah, man, you might be keeping this for like 20, 30 levels. Go to the blacksmith and upgrade it. An important piece of information to have available is the item breakpoint. So if you go past one of the breakpoints I'll be showing on screen now, you will actually get a significant boost to the stat value of that weapon or that piece of gear. Do bear in mind though, the stats themselves, they don't change, the modifiers don't change, but their value will. It will go up, but it will also re-roll within a new range. So there are rare instances where they could actually come out worse. Doesn't happen very often. Usually it's a massive upgrade across the board. So don't just blast through the upgrades at the blacksmith. Just, do one at a time and make sure you're getting good value for your money each time that you upgrade it. Also with those pieces, you may want to consider putting a very powerful aspect on them. But we'll talk a little bit about aspects in just a second. But yeah, here are all of the stat recommendations here that I would recommend going for. For the weapons, it's the same for all of them, so I've not bothered, filling out the ring twice because it's the same, and same for the weapons, it's basically the same again. But with the bludgeoning weapon, this is what I would consider like the best, and then on the slashing weapon, this is kind of like the backup. Now, a side note is, if you have damage to crowd control, slowed, and bleeding, this will only work once you've hit hamstring on your board, and it's a passive here, which allows your bleeding effects to apply a slow. So it's very important to bear that in mind. Now, a quick note on the weapons. There's a couple of things in the early game that you'll have to bear in mind. First of all, weapon DPS is probably the most important thing out of all of these, and I couldn't actually select it as an option. Now, depending on what weapon you're actually using for your Whirlwind, and you can see this by hovering over the skill, you can actually change this by pressing S, going to the skill, and pressing the middle mouse button by default to go through. you may need to change a couple of things, and let's quickly talk about that. So let's say you have a really, really good mace. So you want to use the mace. And this is actually, you know what, let me just get into this a minute. Please do not try and hard force what you believe to be the best Whirlwind build. If you've seen a video showing you the 2 one-handers, a mace, an axe is the best, don't try and hard force it. Do what the game is trying to get you to do. There's going to be times where you're just going to have shit axes or shit swords, but your mace will be amazing, right? Amazing. A good mace build is better than a shit sword build, right? And it applies whatever, you know, what X weapon, Y weapon, it doesn't matter what ones you're talking about. Go for the build that the game is giving you the gear for. This is ultimately going to be the actual best way to play Barbarian. Story's a little different if you're like level 100 and you have everything, okay? But for most people, play what the game has given you. So let's go through some of the key differences here, because it's going to be really important. At level 15, you'll unlock your weapon technique. This allows you to use the benefits from another weapon's expertise without actually having to have it equipped. So if you are using a mace, but you want to use crowd control to slow enemies and bleeding, you need to apply a bleed, right? You need to have a bleed. Now, the only way you're going to be able to do that is use the two-handed sword expertise, because now your attacks will bleed. If you are using a sword, an axe, or a polearm, aka a slashing weapon, well, good news. You can actually apply a bleed through Whirlwind itself. So you can use Furious Whirlwind. Obviously, with a mace, you'll want to use Violent Whirlwind, because you literally cannot use Furious Whirlwind, so you want to swap to that. And that's basically, at this point in the game, that's all you need to swap. So you swap this to this, and then you either use mace if you're using a sword, or, you know, a slashing weapon, or you use sword if you're using a bludgeoning weapon. I do not recommend 2 one-handers this early on. It is far too difficult to gear for with the kind of gear that you'll be getting. So I would use a 2-handed weapon and, you know, just stick to that very simple swapping to and from. Now, if you're lucky and you actually get an opportunity to actually level up the weapon expertise for all of these weapons during your leveling experience, then I would try ahead and, you know, to do as much of that as I can. You know, try all the different weapon types. They all feel slightly different. See which one you like the best. But it saves you a little bit of time at the high end if you've already done it. Or you see here, I've already done it for all the weapons. That, you know, that is very, very, very useful. As far as the skill choice goes, let's quickly go through this. Obviously, all of this will be in the description below, so don't worry, you can always have a look at it. You know, what I'm looking at right here, it's not a problem. We haven't bothered going for any of this. Combat Lunge is a very, very good sort of just opening basic, but you don't get much value from these because we don't really have a lot of crit, or we don't really do a lot of damage with this one. I've gone with Endless Fury as well, so make sure you are using a 2-handed weapon to cast Lunging Strike to get extra Fury. We've got our points in Whirlwind, of course. We've also got points in Tactical Ground Stomp, Tactical Rallying Cry. This is all for Fury. This is all for Fury. I mean, they're good abilities, but they're also all for Fury. Swiftness, I personally love movement speed in the early game. You'll see that in the actually in the gear. I recommend movement speed on the boots, and I recommend movement speed on the amulet. You'd be lucky to get it, but if you can, you know, it's a fantastic addition. It literally speeds everything up. You then go for No Mercy. This is why bleeding is so important, because we get an extra 9% crit against slowed enemies, which hamstrings slows if we bleed. We have Death Blow, Fighter's Death Blow for more fury, also does a ton of damage. Now, I've been trying Iron Maelstrom recently, and I really like this, especially in dungeons that don't have bosses, because you can just clear out a whole pack of elites with this like once every 45 seconds. Very, very good. Now, you can absolutely use Unbridled Rage at this point, but be aware, if you're not spinning into at least like 4 or 5 enemies, you know, like a big group, you're going to run out of rage very quickly. You will hit like a truck though, so you know, be prepared to have to use your basic skill. It is going to happen, unfortunately. It doesn't have to be Lunging Strike. It can also be Flay if you prefer. However, I've always much preferred this myself, so personal preference thing, not super duper important. But this is about level 35 that we're looking at here. You know, once we're at this point, we're going to start getting, you know, we're going to be getting fairly well geared with our gear, and we'll start looking at moving up to World Tier 3 very shortly. At like level 48 is what I would recommend. So you keep doing the dungeons, you keep trying to gear as best you can. As you approach like level 48, take your foot off the gas with investing in gear. Definitely don't be using aspects right now. And I will provide a list of aspects for you to keep an eye out for. I'll have that written on the screen now, as well as in the notes. I've still yet to work on this, but I will put it in the build notes as well here, so you know what you need to look for on legendary pieces of gear. Keep those. Don't use them unless you have loads of them, right? Because these are going to become very rare later on, and they could be a bottleneck for you when you're trying to gear up. But what you will want to do is make sure you do kind of have a basic imprint on most of this gear. Maybe upgrade it 2 times and get yourself ready for moving into that next world tier. But do try and save as many resources as you can, because you will start getting very, very big item upgrades because you're moving into sacred gear. And yeah, I mean, your level 48 is when I'd recommend going into it. This build would be perfectly fine doing so. And then, you know, all being well, you'll be on to World Tier 3. At this point, we'll be moving into this mid-game build, and just my recommendations real quick for doing like level 48 to level 50. I would definitely start doing a bunch of whispers, especially the ones in dungeons. Try and get those 2 levels. Try and get a bunch of keys behind you, sorry, sigils, because you'll need them. I don't really have a finite number I'd recommend, but you know, more than 1 would probably be a good idea. And if you finish your whispers before hitting level 50, just do a couple of regular dungeons. I find that doing anything 3 levels higher level than yourself, it is such an aggressive diminishing like returns curve, and it just slows you down so much actually. Like, and 3 levels is really just kind of like the sweet spot. You'll see a couple of changes in the gear now, and we'll quickly go through them. As far as the stat prioritization goes, again, exactly the same. The same story goes. If you find like a best-in-slot piece of gear, I'll show you some examples on my current Barbarian, who's level 73. I still have an amulet I found at level 30 because it bizrolled. It's just that there was nothing, you know, it bizrolled. I couldn't find anything in like the last 40 levels that is even remotely close to as good as this is, and I probably still won't for a fair while longer. And the same can go for rings. If you find rings, then perhaps like you will just not replace them for a very, very long time. So do pay very close attention to these pieces of gear. One other sort of tip I want to give here real quick, this just reminded me. If you find a best in slot like Echoing Fury or Chieftains, these are really hard to find usually. A lot of people will be very tempted to take the imprint off and put it onto a ring that is good for them right there and then. Though, if you know that the ring is half decent itself and the ring that you don't have, the other ring that you're looking at is not completely 100% best in slot, I recommend just using the ring that the enchant is already on. You see this was on this one. It's got lucky hit, it's got crit chance, but it's got close damage and damage over time. Far from perfect. However, I just don't have a ring that's worthy of a max roll Echoing Fury yet. So I've just used this ring instead because the aspect is so powerful. And, you know, I just don't have other copies of this. So a little bit of like your own discretion and judgment has to be applied here. But sometimes it might be better not to extract it and put it onto anything less than an absolutely perfect ring. And so that I just wanted to kind of add that in real quick. But yeah, this is all the same. Pay very close attention to it. Definitely if you hit something that has like at least 3 of these and the 4th is somewhat usable, then you can consider upgrading it quite a few times. And again, keep an eye on that item breakpoint thing because you can get some significant upgrades here, especially if you move something from level like 712 to 725. They will get very, 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 very strong because they basically become an ancestral piece of gear at that point. And yeah, the amount of stats you get from doing that is insane. So definitely keep an eye on that. It's a very good tool to leverage to get a really good piece of gear into like, you know, godly territory. And now I've got to learn how to alt-tab. Okay, so yeah, here are all of the aspect recommendations. Again, it's a lot of ones that you may not find and this early on. Honestly, sometimes you can get pretty unlucky. Just refer to this build and use what is like the equivalent here until you do find them. As for the skill tree, we've obviously packed this thing out now with all of the skill points because we're assuming we're level 50 plus. We have got the combat lunge. We are, again, this is assuming you're using a slashing weapon. If it's a mace, swap this. And again, the technique, switch from mace to sword. Remember from the last one? That's the same deal here. We have a maxed out rallying cry. We've got a 1 point in tactical rallying shout. Again, we're looking for as much fury as possible this stage because it's not likely we're going to be doing too well there just yet. Fortify is very important, so I'm taking Mighty Warcry. I love juicing the shouts. I don't see many people do this, but I like doing it, so You know, this works perfectly well for me. I have Prolific Fury, I have Swiftness still. None of this has really changed whatsoever, but I have put one more point into Thick Skin. Again, just trying to maintain that fortify best I can. Numbing Wrath is not very good if you don't have very good Fury regen, so you have to do a lot of work with your board as well. And then we've moved to Wrath of the Berserker, and we've got some points in heavy-handed. This is a very, like, defense, very Fury regen-focused board, and it's really just for the mid-game. So this is just, like, what we'll be using for, like, 50 to, like, 60, 50 to 65, maybe. Here's our first Paragon. Typically, the reason it's so over-infested, a lot of you will be looking at this and be like, why is he taking every single point? It's because at this point, you know, I still don't have enough to really get to the next glyph and actually unlock it. So I over-invest in the board that I'm currently on before moving forward into the next one when I know I have enough points to unlock that glyph. Now, a quick conversation on what glyph to go first or which, like, order to do them in, because this is something I think a lot of people just follow a guide on and often have, like, just a ton of problems with, because the glyphs can go in any order and you want to pick the ones that fill the chinks in your armor. They solve the problems that you're having. Now, not every barbarian can gear the same. You can't guarantee that you're going to have, you know, X amount of cooldown reduction, X amount of fury cost reduction. You may be incredibly tanky but have no CDR, and somebody could be completely different. They could be the complete opposite. For that reason, you may want to pick different glyphs at different times. Now, I will include a list on screen of where they can go, what ones do what, and, you know, the recommendation for the total 6 glyphs that I would say that you could go. But those will all be on screen now, and you can choose to take the boards in any order that you want, really. You want to make sure that you can line up the connectors properly, but for the most part, you can do these in any order that you want and prioritize the ones that are best for what you need to do. So if you need damage reduction, maybe you should have Territorial near the beginning. If you need damage, maybe Exploit. If you need, you know, Fury, Martial, or Wrath. You know, there's a lot of flexibility to this, and just to, you know, sort of show you the difference here, I'll go to the end game build and show you the Mace one. This is actually the same. This is the same board I've always been using, and a lot of you guys are familiar on my board. It goes practically straight up, but this one's going more or less straight down, and that's because I've done things in a different order. Now, if I had to give one recommendation for the order in which to do them in, and I'm only going to give the one because I only have the one, is do Warbringer second. It's such a valuable board. You have Fury on kill here, which is huge for Whirlwind. We're killing a lot of people at the, you know, a very, very quick interval, so we get a ton of Fury regen. Warbringer allows us to stay fortified near permanently, so we don't have to take Numbing Wrath, and we can move points from our skill board out of fortifying, so that this is like huge value for us. And then again, like, you know, we have a dex strength node here, which means we can put most of our options in here, depending on what we want. And it has some very, very powerful rare nodes as well that are going to give us significant boost to our damage. And let's go back to this board, sorry. You will notice as well, I may have mentioned this, but we have gone for blue gems because we now should have enough crit rating to make use of crit damage. Everything else has remained the same there. And yeah, there are the new skills as well. So at this point, this is kind of the board from, like I said, 50 to 60, maybe even closer to like 68. But then we'll start moving into the late game build, and our Paragon board will look a little bit more fleshed out like this. Again, Warbringer first. I've then gone into Martial on the Weapons Master board here because I really valued the Hunter-Killer node, and that's what I wanted to go for next. But for me, you know, I moved Martial. It was originally here for Territorial. It's a lot of flexing, right? You've got to be able to identify what you need and when, and then also see the best place to have these ones. So, for example, you know, I knew that having Martial here would be better because it increases the effectiveness of the nodes around it. Now, the nodes here are great, but the nodes here are a bit better. Like these blue ones here, like a double physical and I got double armor. Here I had 1 armor, 1 physical, right? So there's getting a lot more value from having it here, and it's very important to understand these little differences of where to position and when to have them. But this is a very strong board. Like, this has all the bases covered for me. You know, I have Territorial for damage reduction, I have Exploit for damage, and I have Martial for a bit of everything. And when you hit Exploit, one of the most important things that is going to change about your build is the item prioritization will get a little bit different. So we're going to go back to gears and skill. First is that we now have green gems. Why green over blue when like they both basically do exactly the same thing? They give you more crit damage, the same amount of crit damage, but you know, on different conditionals. You are very unlikely to make a boss crowd controlled. So that's why we don't use blues. Blues work perfectly. Like that, you get crit chance on all regular mobs all the time, but not on bosses. Vulnerability you can apply to bosses pretty easily. So, well, you can apply it guaranteed for 3 seconds with exploit. And to be honest, while leveling, unless you're like pushing like Nightmare Dungeons 10 levels higher than you, you will probably be killing even bosses in less than 3 seconds. And that is why you'll see that well, especially in some of my builds at the late game, I probably won't even take this in my speedrunning builds, but it's here now because when you're leveling, you may be doing world bosses, you may be doing like you know, hell tides where there's going to be a lot of people around and things won't be dying so quickly. But if you find that you do not, you know, if things are not living for more than 3 seconds, go ahead and take these points out. And then what you can do is reallocate them somewhere a little bit more like damage orientated. So one recommendation for me, I would probably put them in something like, where's my cries here? So I put them in like my cries to get a little bit more value out of those. But you can kind of flex those points in and out depending on what you want to do. But I put them in there because honestly, pressure point, you know, whether you have it or whether you're not, it's not going to be making a huge difference to the build unless you're doing like Uber Lilith. We definitely aren't doing Uber Lilith at this point because we are looking at like level 75 with this build. As for the itemization, like I said, it will be a little different. We now have vulnerable damage as the second highest thing that we want on our weapons. So vulnerable damage is going to come in strong. You want to pick it up. Crit damage, vulnerable damage. Yeah, very, very, very powerful stat. You will see a ridiculous boost in your damage here. Now, obviously, before we get to this point, we will have to do the second capstone dungeon. And at level 68 is when I would recommend doing that. Once you have done that, World Tier 4 pretty much going to be it's going to be the same process as World Tier 3 was. You're going to do like regular dungeons from 68 to 70, maybe pick up a couple of ancestrals, and then start building into this late game board that I was just showing you. Now, one thing that does also change is we get introduced to resource generation on our rings. This is an incredible stat for us. This is an insane stat for us. So definitely something to keep your eye out for. Now, obviously, if you find any ancestral gear that's biz roll, you can max upgrade that. You can max aspect enchant that because the likelihood of improving it is next to none. Just for reference, if you wanted to know, the like maximum item power available in the game is 820. So if you have anything anywhere near that with good rolls, that's an item that will never get replaced, like ever. So definitely keep that in mind. And the skill tree, again, like we were just having a look at this, nothing really that exciting here. If you're going for the mace build, you're going to want to actually pay attention to some of the aspects because they will change. You'll have aspect of relentless berserking. You'll also have berserk ripping. You may not necessarily have this with the bleed build because there's a lot of synergy between the mace and also berserking. You will also, on both of these builds, now that you have vulnerability or whenever you get exploit, you will now want to use the two-handed axe expertise. And this is why you need berserk ripping and like high berserk uptimes, because that's how you apply your bleed with the mace build. And you still want to be able to do that for, of course, hamstring and all of the knock-on effects of being able to bleed enemies. If you do go for the mace build, you may want to consider going for like berserk duration on the boots, and I believe you can pick it up somewhere else as well. It was the gloves to the helmet, because that will come in very, very, very handy for you. Now, all of these builds, by the way, they are endgame builds. They are definitely more speedrun orientated than like high key pushing. That's something that I'm really still figuring out myself. So, look forward to those builds. But once you're into this build, once you level 75, once you've got to about here, you'll move into an end game build. And even though this is the mace build, the Paragon board is the same, and this is the whole board. Again, like you know, I just put things in the route of order that I believe that they were most useful for me. You know, my cooldown reduction has been fantastic, so I'm not planning on going for disembowel until next to last. But again, you know, apply your own discretion to what order you want these in. If it goes up, down, left, right, doesn't matter, right? It's all down to what you want to prioritize, what you feel like your gear is not providing you. That's how I would recommend doing your Paragon board. As a rule of thumb, leveling glyphs up, I just like to do the ones that I have equipped one level at a time. So I'd be like, you know, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, like that. If I'm unlocking a new node and like these 3 are level 15 and this one's level 1, I'll just power level this one up to the same level as these ones and then just start going, you know, 16, 16, 16, 16. And that's how I like to do it. There really is no rhyme or reason to that. It's just the way I prefer to do it. You could just do them level 15 at a time, then do them like level 20 at a time. It really, really is up to you. But once you're in World Tier 4, it is a straight shot to level 100. Just do Nightmare Dungeons and Hell Tides. Nightmare Dungeons and Hell Tides. I may have not stressed it enough, but Hell Tides you definitely want to work into your build. Into your leveling route, because you are going to get very much bottlenecked by your crafting capabilities if you don't have enough Forgotten Souls. I've not been able to craft like about 5 or 6 upgrades because I just keep running out of Forgotten Souls. You definitely want to mix in a ton of Hell Tides with your leveling. They're not as much XP as Nightmare Dungeons, not even close, but they're not bad, and you can gain a lot of material from these for flasks and just generally upgrading, crafting, all that kind of stuff. So don't skimp on them. You definitely want to do loads, and that's it. Like, that's the whole shebang. That is everything, and you know, it's a bit of a new format, this, for me. I don't usually go into this much detail and provide this many variations of the builds. I will include like budget versions, mace and sword versions, as many as I can, and I will provide some written notes as well. They may not all come with the notes immediately. I'm slowly working through it. My intention is to get this video out as soon as possible for you guys, because I'm getting asked for it a lot. But yeah, I hope you found it useful. You know, if you did, let me know. Consider subscribing, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, peace.